folks, I'm Sean Crabtree.
And I'm Cameron Bailey.
Welcome into Growth Profits.
Coming to you live each week.
We don't want to change the way you do business.
We want to change the way you're thinking about your business.
We want you to have better results, happier clients, and make more money.
Let's get it started.
And welcome into Dental Profits, where we come to you live each week talking about the business of your business. It's all about happier clients, better results, making more money, and enjoying the ride. And that is what we're going to talk about today. I'm really anxious to have a guest today. I wish she were in studio, but we have her on the line. The lady who is our guest speaker today is Paige Mead of Paige Mead Recruiting. And the reason I'm so excited to have Paige with us today, it's about happier clients, better results, making you more money, and enjoying the ride. This whole conversation about associates there's a lot of myths surrounding all of that, and we've got one of the experts, leading experts in the industry to help clear all of this up for us today. I've known this lady for a lot of years. I'm really happy to have her with us. Paige Mead of Paige Mead Recruiting. Paige, welcome.
Thank you, Sean. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so glad to have you here. And Paige, before we get too much in the weeds on this thing, and I really want you to get in the weeds, tell me, I really do. You and I have worked together on many projects over the years. I know you very well. I know who you are, and I know what you're about. But I don't think a lot of people who are listening may know that. So tell us who you are, what you do, how you got into this business, what makes you different.
Okay, that's a lot.
That is a lot.
Stay on track here. Well, my name is Paige Mead. I am a recruiter specifically dedicated to the dental industry. So I will explain what recruiter means, because a lot of people have a specific idea in mind when they hear that word.
I was just about to say, listen, you know what? It's like the word consultant. Okay, yeah. Anybody can be a consultant, and there's no definition of what the heck that really means, right? Like anybody, you know what? It's like fee for service. I used to think when my clients would say, we're a fee for service practice, I thought fee for service meant for service, but it doesn't. It means all kinds of different things.
Depending on who's saying it, right? Exactly.
Yeah. So as a recruiter, now you are not a recruiter, but that's what you would consider yourself. Because
I've had my clients, several of them, tell me you really should call yourself something different, and I have yet to figure out exactly what word it should be. So feel free to volunteer. But basically, I help great people find the career that makes their heart sing, and I help companies, practices find the great people that fit for them. That's a very simplified way to put it, but recruiting all by itself is more than just finding people. It's drawing them in. So in other words, you can hire someone to go out and get you a bunch of names, maybe even a bunch of resumes, and then you can take all of those yourself and you can try to figure out which one is going to be the right person for your practice. Or you can hire me, and I will go out and bring you an individual with a story and a future and hopes and dreams and qualifications and all of those other things that really matter when you start to mesh people and stories together. So I don't know how much clearer I just made it, but I help people find the right folks to keep their story going the right way.
And I'm going to let you expound on that a little bit, because I know you well enough to know that there's maybe even more to it than that. But the reason I'm laughing, Paige, is because I can tell you were just telling me you just got back from the dentist, right? And I can tell you got a little bit of you're still a little numb there, right?
Yes. Can I do a shout out to my dentist?
Sure.
Okay. I just want to thank Dr. Eric Quinlan in Gig Harbor, Washington, because he and his team know me so well. They know how to handle me when I get anxious in the chair. I just would not go anywhere else. And so I'm not in any kind of pain. I just have a little numbness I'm still dealing with here. So yeah,
I could tell that
Yeah.
in your smile, and I appreciate you. I appreciate you being with us in spite of that. But
Well, it wasn't
nobody else would know but me
fun.
because I see you on a regular basis.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you, when it comes to an associate, if I'm listening to this and I am a young doctor who's expanding and I'm perhaps considering an associate because of all that, or if I'm an elderly doctor, I think the median age for dentists right now in the U.S. is about 50.
Mhm.
So if I'm a 50 or 50 plus doctor and I'm looking for an associate, tell me this first, because I know the answer to this, but I want my listeners to understand this. And there is a difference. There is a difference in people who recruit and what it is that you do.
Yeah.
I want you to say that in your own words. I hear what you're saying about the story, but what does that mean to me? If I'm a dentist and I'm hearing that and I don't really have how do I put some concreteness under that? What does that mean? How do you do what you do?
Well, I definitely want to stay on track here with the question, but the truth is, it's my backstory that will kind of feed this a little bit.
Sure.
Is that all right? Okay. So I started recruiting 20 years ago, maybe a little closer to 21 now. And when I did it, I was
So you were
actually,
like 16 when you started.
yeah, very funny. No, I wasn't. No, I wasn't. But thank you. That's wonderful. Um, Actually, I was looking for a job at the time, and I was extremely frustrated. Uh, I just felt like a tiny, tiny little grain of sand in the sea, and trying to figure out. I was at a time in my life where I knew I needed to step into a career that was going to grow and be the right thing. But I was so confused about options. So I literally walked into a temp agency one morning, and my thinking was, well, okay, if I'm a temp, I can try a couple things and see what makes sense to me. Um, I graduated with a sociology degree, and that suited me really well in college. When I got into the temp agency, I realized I was in the middle of a lot of life coming and going. And unless you've had the experience personally, you don't realize the people who come into a temp agency are all people who are looking for their answers. So you're just
Right.
kind of swimming in that activity on a daily basis. I actually left the temp agency with a job at the temp agency, which I had not expected when I went in that morning. And I won't go into how I made that work out, but it was the best move I ever made in my life. So I stayed in temporary staffing for about 3 years. Then my husband and I swapped out, and I went home, had babies, and raised our kids. Then we had some unique life challenges, and we swapped back again. And I went back into the recruiting world. I realized that I never had actually left it. It's it's fortuitous in a lot of ways how I came to this, but ultimately the way I'm wired is that I'm always finding people and connections and remembering where they are, and when the timing is right, they fit. So that's a really flowery
And
way
I
of
know I know this firsthand because of
sure.
the work that you and I have done together over the years. It really is in your DNA. It's who you
Yeah.
are.
Mhm.
I mean, if you were not doing this in terms of your business, it's still in you.
Yeah.
You have this DNA that is just built for matching suitable people together, and it's just who you are. And I don't think you can fight it.
No, no. I thought about trying at one point, but no, you're absolutely right. This is just, it's how I'm wired. It's what I do day in and day out, whether I'm thinking about it or not. Does that mean I'm constantly recruiting dentists? No, actually, it doesn't. It serves that very, very well. But when I say it's just how I'm wired, it is. It's how I think. It's how I look at the world. So when I got back into the workforce after raising the kids, I I tripped over the dental industry. Really, I had a very fine friend from original relationships way back at the temp agency who was in dental. He called me. I said, "Sure, I'll come see what that's all about," and I never left.
20
Uh,
years later.
yes, exactly,
Awesome.
exactly. So it's my home. It's where I love to hang out. I understand the minds and the hopes and dreams of the professionals in this industry. It's just the right place for me.
Well, I understand that if I'm a doctor listening to this,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I would submit that what they're probably thinking is that a recruiter is a recruiter, and it falls into that category of finding you a person. And just to expound a little bit on what you're saying, because I've worked with you, I know when you talk about telling a story, I mean, you go in and you do your research. You physically visit. You make the relationships. You get to know the people. You find out as much as humanly possible about both ends of that equation.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen you do this in the work that we've done together. You literally go in and you build a story based on everything that you've learned, from demographics right down to the personalities that you're dealing with. And then you go tell that story, and then you also gain that story from people that you're trying to place, and then you do a really good job of matching those stories.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
If I'm listening to this, well, here's a great question. Okay, because I don't know if you're driving down the road, or if you're listening to this on iTunes or whatever, take a few notes, okay? Because here's a question that I get asked a lot. And that question is, what percentage, Paige, would you say of associate relationships that don't work with you, but just in the industry as a whole, what percentage of those relationships fail, and why?
Okay.
What would you say is the why when you come in and try to rescue that after the fact or whatever? What's the why?
Well, first of all, I know that it is greater than 50% and some people will say upwards of 70. I wouldn't disagree with that, but I do think it varies kind of from individual to individual. But basically, a doctor has only a few options to find an associate. They can rely on all of their own connections, which are great. You should have them. They can post an ad online and hope somebody finds it.
Right.
They can call a recruiter of some kind and ask them for help. And in general, I don't do anything like anybody else does. So it's always kind of breaking down what those look like, really. But the reason I see that most of those relationships fail when a doctor is trying to hire an associate to the practice is because not only does the dentist really miss a lot of the pieces that go into understanding what he really needs. So you see what you think you need, and then you've got a whole lot of little details and variables that you can't see all by yourself. And we are human beings. We have two eyes, and we need a lot of help finding the right person for a match. And it's so much easier to explain to somebody who has tried on their own and failed.
Right.
I hear someone say, I've tried everything. Fabulous. Then we're going to have a much different experience. But I think in addition to the doctor who doesn't know, most associates or would-be associates also do not know. They don't know what their options are. They don't know what the landscape of the industry really is. They're making decisions based on fear, based on student loans that they feel are just going to swamp them. There's that piece. So I think there's a very big breakdown of communication that is just there because you don't have all the details on each other.
I totally would agree with you. I was going to say, by the way, closer to like 80%.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been in the industry as long as you have, and I have seen maybe worst case scenarios more so, perhaps, but I would submit that it is closer to 80% in terms of the failure rate. But I see this on a daily basis. The doctor, the original owner doctor, is not clear specifically on what the reasons are that they're really looking for an associate, because they don't know that, then they don't know what they're looking for in an associate. Mm-hmm. And we spend a lot of time trying to dive in and asking these doctor questions. You have to know what your ultimate goal is for bringing an associate on board before you can realize what it is that you're after. Now, the great news is if you're involved, you're able to wade through all of that because it's what you do on a daily basis. But somebody who is in the game and they're playing dentistry every single day, it's tough to kind of separate yourself and really and there's lots of ways that can really go. I mean, are you looking for an associate because you truly have expanded to the point that you need help? Then that's a different story than the doctor who says, maybe I would kind of like to drop back a couple of days. Well, there's so many things that you have to consider before you can really take a look at that. And because those aren't clear, I see that all the time. Communication is not so expectations are not communicated properly. But when you're involved, all of that goes away because you are at a very deep level in terms. You're very clear before you bring the candidate, right? You're clear on all of that.
Mm-hmm. It's my goal to bring candidates to the table who are already bought in to the opportunity. They understand what it could mean for them. They understand what their options are in addition to that particular opportunity that they're looking at, and they really have all the information. That's
Right.
one of the big things that's missing, and that's why I do what I do, is that when people are trying to find each other, if you don't have all the information, what are the chances that you know the things that you need to know to make the best decision for yourself?
Here's a great question for you.
Yeah.
And I know I'm putting you on the spot here. Okay. What's the standard? I mean, nationwide. I know that it's sort of different in different parts of the country. But if you had to say, what's an average standard? What is an average standard in the U.S. that an associate typically earns?
Ooh. Well.
So if you're a possible associate listening to this, you want to take notes. If you're looking for an associate, you want to be listening to this and taking notes.
Yeah, what I'm finding is that it's right around 150,000 if you really bust your buttons in production. And depending on who you are working for in those first couple of years and how well the office is organized and functions all by itself, there's a lot that can go into and affect that. I think we're seeing, I know we're seeing practices needing to be more open to compensation in out-of-the-box ways, especially with corporate dentistry coming into play. I don't think you got to be worried about that like everybody feels like they got to worry about that. But they are changing the game in terms of compensation and how people can be paid. There's not just one option. So there is another reason why.
Share that, Paige, because I think that would be interesting no matter which side of the coin I'm on. If I'm listening to this, right? If I'm an associate or if I'm looking to hire somebody, what are the different options out there?
They're as broad as there are different practices, honestly. And I think what you struggle with is people doing what they've always done. Mm-hmm. So like with the corporate dental offices, there's regularly a big push to have support on repaying student loans. So that becomes a very, very big factor. It may not actually translate to much in the end.
Right.
But it plays on the fear.
The emotion part.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you're coming out with student loans, the size of the debts that they are right now, how can you not be concerned about that kind of thing? Mm-hmm. So if you're a private practice, and you consider yourself in competition with any other practices in your area or with any of the corporate offices, you should be paying a lot of attention to what's going on for people with their student loans, because it's too big a subject to overlook. And that honestly is the biggest one right now. There aren't too many other emotional hangups that can hook an associate like, we're going to help you with that debt.
So the young possible associates out there who are listening to this are going, yeah, absolutely. That's my biggest concern right now is those student loans. And so I need to be considering that if I'm on the other end on the hiring part of it. That might be something I need to consider in the equation. And that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that at this moment. I'm curious. 150,000 is kind of a good average. You're just throwing it out there, If I'm a dentist and I'm looking to add an associate, break it down for me. What would I possibly be looking at paying? And I know it's a broad brush because we're looking at all of America, but what would I expect to pay on average as a percentage? And by the way, is that percentage of production, percentage of collection? And I understand it may look different on the front end than on the back end, and there may be time frames and all of that. But just as a general kind of a broad stroke for those who are listening, if you can, how would that look if I'm on the paying end of that?
Well, it depends entirely on how you are structuring compensation. If you're paying on production,
If I'm trying to be competitive,
well, then I would hire an associate who works like crazy
Mhm.
and give them the opportunity to affect their own income.
Mhm.
And that's, I've got a client right now that's doing that. The average is about 150 with a couple of assistance in student loan repayment, but this particular practice can do 250. And the dentists inside are not dying. They're having fun.
right?
So it depends entirely on what kind of a practice you are and what the values are around money. It's a really, really tough subject too, because how a practice owner relates to money and how the associate coming in, if those two things are not a match, forget it. And then when you say to somebody, what's your relationship with money? That's a big question. That's weird for a lot of people
Sure.
too. But I think what the options are that students have and how much they can make in the first year has everything to do with how they relate to money and whether or not they know what options they can choose from. So if you are, if you're in a totally production focused scenario, you can figure out what your income ought to look like. You can take a look at the contract and you can figure it out. Now, here's the thing that gets sticky for me in this conversation, and it is why I am directly avoiding answering the question that you
Okay.
asked.
Okay.
This is where we get confidential. This is where I will have my clients not want me to share their formulas and the different ways that they're creating a package different than what it used to be.
So just to go back to one of the things you said a moment ago, Paige, getting clear, if I'm on the hiring side of this, getting clear on my outcomes, I can't tell you how many times over the years that has been a major, major issue. If you're listening to this and you're looking at hiring an associate, dive in. Paige you're saying that there are some confidential issues in terms of what those packages and some of the things are. But one of the issues that I find is a doctor is not very clear, not totally clear on the reason that they're looking for an associate, and they haven't thought their way through this. Maybe they have an overhead that's really high, maybe an 80% overhead, let's say, and they're not working with somebody like you. They're not working with somebody like me. They've got an 80% overhead. They think they want an associate because they're not ready to retire. They still like doing what they're doing. But down the road, they want to go ahead and hire an associate, and down the road, they want to be able to step down a couple of days. The problem is, if they're paying an associate, let's say, just for giggles, 35% of collections or 40% of collections, and they've got an 80% overhead, then if that associate is doing the work that the doctor could be doing, they're losing 20 cents on every dollar to be able to have that doctor do that work because they got an 80% overhead. Now, there's more to it, obviously, than that, and that's it. But those are the kinds of things that you need to be considering, right?
Sure. Yeah. You need to have, if you don't have that knowledge yourself, you need to have somebody looking in on your financials and making sure that that's in shape before you bring on an associate. Absolutely.
And I'm surprised at how many don't know that information. There's just the CPA, it's out there, right? And I'd have to look at it. I'd have to get it from the CPA. These are things that you need. Overhead is certainly a consideration. Because it's all part of what you said a moment ago. You got to get clear on what your outcomes are, because you're not going to be able to get the person. You don't even know what you're looking for, right? Now let's go to the other side of that, okay? Because I have a feeling that if I'm a young associate, there's a couple things that I hear or I have in my mind. Number one, I'm freaked out because I got a chunk load of student loans, right? And I have this idea that, I'm going to make $200,000 right out of the chute, the very first, my first go at it, or more, 300,000, or whatever. And sometimes those idealistic views kind of hamper the reality of what's out there. Am I wrong?
No, I don't think you're wrong, and I think that those kinds of expectations, especially when you don't have a good background on the doctor you're talking to. So let's say I'm a student. I'm ready to go get my first associate role, and I've got a pretty high expectation of what my income ought to be, and it's based on some different information I've heard. Maybe I've read another student dentist's ideas about, but they're all personal reflections, and
Right.
your perspective on what it's really going to be like is just going to change depending on what window you're looking through. So let's say this new graduate is going for their first associate role. Their expectations are skewed, and then you've got the practice on the other side who may or may not have tried to hire an associate in the last 5 years. If you hired an associate 5 years ago, I would tell you it's a whole different game today than it was then. I would tell you still need guidance through that process. Um, and it's really just to clarify, because those expectations can throw you off. So let's say practice is having an interview with that doctor who expects that they're going to be earning more. Well, it may not have anything to do with how they look at money. It may only be because of what they've heard, or maybe it's because it's what they think they need to earn because of all those student loans that
Right.
are hanging over them. I mean, there could just be a wide variety of things, but you have that conversation, and maybe the practice owner walks away thinking, oh, that kid, they just think you don't have to work for it. They just
Hmm.
think you're going to get paid. And
Hmm.
that's what they all expect right now. Those darn millennials.
Right.
You know, we can all carve out that conversation. But the truth is that new doctor, that new associate, they didn't have accurate information. And if the person bringing them together, or if how they had gotten together was equipped with here's what they've experienced so far, here's the perspective they're coming with from that idea, you can create a conversation between the two of them that will go a different way. It's enlightening. It's, oh my goodness, is that what you've had to deal with? Okay, well, let me tell you what it's like in my
Right.
practice.
Right. Right.
Where, we are very patient focused here. We don't talk about money, but you can do really, really well because of X, Y, and Z. But that conversation never happens unless you've got more context on the person.
Okay, so let me ask you this. I've never read a stat on this. My experience is that there is and it's based on my own context. Could be totally wrong. You need to set me straight. My experience is that there is a mindset out there that, and I've heard this time and time again, that if I'm a young associate, the money is in the metropolitan areas. The real money that can be made is close to the mall, so that my husband or wife has the ability to, go hit the mall and all of those sorts of things. What's your experience?
That it's the exact opposite.
That's certainly what I found.
Yeah.
And I'm not in that particular end of the business, but I found just the opposite. And it's amazing to me that so many, at least in my experience, so many of the younger folks are not looking to be in the rural areas, but yet that's where the opportunities are. That's where the money is. That's where the standard of living is so much better. From all aspects. That's interesting.
Well, what you're talking about is a discussion of personal values in the end. I listened to a podcast of yours this morning, actually, while I was in the dental chair. Seriously, I did. It helped, actually, but it was a podcast about the difference between price and value. And so, and that's on my mind a lot, primarily because it is difficult for people to really understand what's at the core of their values. And the reason all of this matters is we're talking about a perception that I'm going to make more in a certain area, a perception that my quality of life is going to be what I want it to be in a certain area. And it might all be based on a skewed picture of what I actually value, because I haven't I haven't had anyone help me dive deep
I
into that
totally
subject.
see that. I absolutely see that.
Right.
Totally
So it would be most uncommon. It is most uncommon when I talk with a doctor who's looking for an associate opportunity and they actually know what they want for the right reasons. Most of us kind of trickle through life and we find our way. And it's not that that's bad. You have to know how to do that. But if without guidance, without knowing what your options are, you're going to miss some along the way. It's just how it goes.
I couldn't agree with you more. Really valuable information there, Paige. Really valuable information. Okay, last question.
Okay. I hope I can answer.
Would you advise? I'm curious.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things you said is be willing to get creative on your compensation package. Totally see that. I totally see that. And I think so much of it is based on what's happened in the past or what they hear from other people. I totally see that. That's a really valuable piece. Be willing to get creative. Be willing to package differently, perhaps. And one of the things you said a moment ago that I didn't reiterate is while you shouldn't be necessarily afraid of corporate dentistry, in terms of competitive packaging, that probably is something that you need to be considering because that's who you're competing against in this arena if you're talking about hiring an associate. Okay. One of the biggest things that I run into is when I get into a situation, I'm going to make lots of people mad here, but that's okay because it's about the truth. It's about the business of your business. I want you to be making more, have happier clients, making more money and better results, and I want you to enjoy the ride. One of the big challenges I see is that owner doctors get themselves in a situation where they're committed to paying on productivity. Mm-hmm. And productivity doesn't pay the bills. Mm-hmm. Collections pays the bills. Mm-hmm. And so like the other aspects of their labor costs in the overhead are tied to the production. And now they've got an associate in there who's tied to that productivity. And if the collections are at 80% and their overhead's at 80%, and you're paying somebody 40%, you've got a 20% gap right off the bat because of your overhead, but then you got a 20% gap because you didn't collect everything that you're paying. So you actually are losing big time money in that scenario. I mean, like to the tune of double, right? Mm-hmm. Am I off base? What say you?
Well, okay, so the question is,
I guess what I'm saying is I understand getting creative, but
well, I didn't say get prepared to pay through the nose. And that is one thing that people hear when I say that. Get prepared to be creative with your compensation packages. I do not mean get prepared to pay more than you can, and understanding exactly how to structure that. If listen, I say no to clients. If I've got a client, if I've got a client who is not ready for this for one reason or another, I will tell them where I think the stopping point is, and I won't go any further. You have to understand that it is a business decision. It's a relationship decision. It's a future growth and opportunity.
A marriage.
It's a marriage. Thank you. Absolutely. It's a marriage. And people don't people don't always recognize this, but when you break up in an employment scenario, it's one of the top 5 life experiences that can really rock you. There's birth of a loved one, death of a loved one, marriage, divorce, and changing your job. Those are the big ones. So right. I want to make sure that my clients are really ready for it before they come in. There's always information and learning when we sit down together, but I am not saying all you practice owners out there, you better be prepared to pay more. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying you need to have a healthy view of money. You need to be ready to discuss it in light of what this new associate's needs and expectations and hopes for their future are going to be.
Which means you have to know that stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, you need to know that stuff. But it's not it just doesn't fit right if all of those pieces aren't there. You might find a short-term fix. You might find an associate who's willing to take a package or willing to take a position, and then they disappear when something else that fits better for them comes along. So, there's a lot of ways we can do this, but ultimately, if a practice is open to fitting and stretching just a little bit, it's not about how much money you're coming out. It isn't at all. It's about working together and making a marriage.
So, just to wrap up what you're saying here, some points that I can take away if I'm listening to this. I need to get clear about what my outcomes are, no matter which side of the aisle that I'm on. If I'm a candidate or if I'm looking to hire a candidate, I got to get clear about what my outcomes are, and I've got to be able to communicate those so that each party on the other side knows. I need to be I need to be willing to get creative if I'm on the hiring side, paying attention to things like student loans or there's numerous other things that can go into a compensation package, and I don't want to go necessarily down the tried and true path of the past. I want to be a little bit creative, keeping in mind that corporate dentistry is forcing us to be in that place, right? And when I'm getting creative, that doesn't mean that I need to be paying through the nose. So I've got to be clear about what my numbers are, and I've got to be comfortable about where it is I'm trying to go before I can go down that road.
Yes, very well said.
One of the things that, and you mentioned a moment ago that you turn down clients. I've worked with lots of people in dentistry, and you absolutely have the integrity of very few people that I've met in dentistry. I so much appreciate that about you. I so much appreciate the fact that not only did you come on here, but the relationship that we have and what you've meant to my clients. I was on LinkedIn, I guess it's been a few weeks ago now, but I was on LinkedIn, and I can't remember the exact post, but I think somebody had made a comment about a recruiter, or maybe a recruiter had made a comment about other recruiters or something. And there were hundreds of people that came and posted on your behalf about what you had meant in their lives. On and on and on and on and on and on. Hundreds of people that posted that. And I can't tell you, it warmed my heart, and it just reminded me once again about who it is that you are for your clientele. And I so appreciate that about you.
Oh, thank you. I care what happens to my people.
What's that?
I said I care what happens to
I know,
my people.
and it's obvious. It is obvious, Paige. Thank you for those takeaways. Thank you for being with us. If you're listening, if you're watching, I hope you took lots of notes. All the things we talked about, get clear about your outcomes, pay attention to things like student loans, be willing to get creative. Be clear either side of the aisle about where it is that you're trying to go, and being creative doesn't necessarily mean paying through the nose.
You got it.
Thank you, Paige. Thank you for being with us. Those of you who are listening, thank you for joining us. This has been Dental Profits, where we come to you live each week talking about the business of your business. It's about getting you happier clients, better results, making more money, and enjoying the ride. I'm Sean Crabtree. I'll see you next week.